Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Stephen Sparks. I am a bookseller at Green Apple Books in San Francisco, and I'm also on the Bay Area Book Festival's programming committee, which basically puts together wish lists of great writers that we would like to have come to the festival, and then leaves all the hard work to everyone else. And Jonas. There are going to be various iterations of Jonas's name. We were talking earlier, and I said, I know I'm not saying that as a Swedish person would. And he pointed out that I'm not saying it the way a British person would. So I'm going to be a very American, probably call you Jonas or Jonas or Jonas. Yeah. We'll go through the whole gamut.
You know, I think Sweden is the only country, one of the only, the country in the world that we pronounce double syllables, you know, and that's a kind of weird thing to do. So my name would actually be Jonas. Which
one more
you
iteration.
Don't want to say that.
And so I will introduce Jonas, who is a Swedish actor, playwright, novelist. His novel *The Room*, which we'll be discussing this afternoon, was published in English translation by Hogarth Press last year. Second novel, which we will talk about toward the end, The Invoice, is due out next month, in just about a month. Both translated by Neil Smith. The Room was praised by Neil Mukherjee as a gripping, tense, demonic fable in which the unease is precision-tooled and the turns of the screw wholly unexpected. I'm just going to launch into a question about that. How does it feel to have a novel described as precision-tooled and gripping and tense and demonic?
Well, I think The Guardian, the newspaper in Britain, had they said comedy or tragedy, and no, I'm just it's just wonderful. I think that's kind of what I want, because I want to keep this unease feeling about my work. You know, what is it? Is it comedy, or is it tragedy, or is it psychodrama?
It's we were discussing, so The Room, to give a very brief and probably imprecise plot summary, is about a very complicated, it's narrated by a very complicated man named Bjorn, whose name we don't learn until about, I don't know, almost halfway through the book. He's a very reticent guy in some ways, and in other ways a very voluble guy. It's about an office worker and his co-workers in an institution called the Authority, which is kind of this vague, you know, I think anybody in the modern world understands these vague sort of monumental organizations that loom over us, and we don't quite know how to react to them or avoid them in some ways. And so Bjorn discovers this room in his office, which leads to a series of either comic or tragic events, depending on your take, which maybe we'll get to the bottom of today. Although I don't think we will. I don't think it's the kind of book that has this weird, almost like a fable-like quality that really leaves it to the reader in the way that I think the best literature does, to decide the takeaways there. I think everybody could have a completely differing opinion about what this room is, or what Bjorn's problems are, or what his solutions are, or whether he's a hero or a tragic figure. But before I get a little too more into that, would you like to read the first couple of pages and give us a little introduction?
Absolutely, I would love to. The first time I walked into the room, I turned back almost at once. I was actually trying to find a toilet, but got the wrong door. A musty smell hit me when I opened the door, but I don't remember thinking much about it. I hadn't actually noticed there was anything at all along this corridor leading to the lifts, apart from the toilets. Oh, I thought, a room. I opened the door, then shut it. No more than that. I had started work at the Authority 2 weeks before, and in many respects I was still a newcomer. Even so, I tried to ask as few questions as I could. I wanted to become a person to be reckoned with, a as soon as possible. I had gotten used to being one of the leaders in my last job, not a boss or even a team manager, but someone who could sometimes show other people what to do. Not always liked, not a sycophant or a yes man, but well regarded and treated with a certain respect, possibly even admiration, ever so slightly ingratiating perhaps. I was determined to build up the same position at my new place of work as soon as I could. It wasn't really my decision to move on. I was fairly happy at my last job and felt comfortable with the routines, but somehow I outgrew the position and ended up feeling that I was doing a job that was way below my abilities. And I have to admit that I didn't always see eye to eye with my colleagues.
So there's... So Bjorn, I think one of the great things about this book is that it is narrated from the single consciousness, and that opens up a lot of room for irony and sort of telling by not telling. And I wondered, Jonas is also an actor, so I want to talk a little bit about that, but I wonder how writing from a single consciousness, if that's maybe related to acting, but how, like, because it seems enjoyable. Like,
I think it is. It is absolutely related to acting. I think I worked as an actor for like 20 years or something. I went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and then I moved on. So and I'm still working at the Royal Dramatic Theatre of Stockholm. So but then I take some time off and write my books. And I started out writing plays because that's sort of seemed like the most natural thing to do. But then I sort of turned to fiction and start writing short stories, and they got longer and longer, and then now they this long. But I think the writing process is that I just start writing, and I have no idea what's going to happen. And so I just start with anything, a situation, a line or two, something that I've heard, something that I've overheard someone say, or perhaps something I said myself, and or something that I didn't dare say myself, or something that I said myself and regretted. So and then sort of start from there, and then I just go on writing, and this is of course, in a way, a very uneconomical way of writing, because if you don't know where you're heading, you don't know if there is going to be anything. And a lot of time there is just nothing. And I just write and realize that, no, this is nothing. And then I just have to start all over again on something else. But sometimes, very rarely though, I sort of stumble upon something that is what you should, something bigger or deeper or something. And I think, and then I sort of just try to be there and try to, it's almost like I can sense that there is some kind of mystery to this story. And then I think the trick then is to follow this thread, this mystery, and explore it, and discover it, and try to write it without solving it. And that is kind of a challenge, at least for a writer. But I think it's a challenge for every human being, because I think that's what we naturally want to do. We want to solve a problem, but on the other hand, it's a wonderful feeling for a writer when you realize that I'm onto something and I don't really know what it is. So and just explore that is a great thing. But as I said, it's you need to write a lot, right. and there are much I take out a lot as well.
Yeah. Is there joy in that for you? Because it seems, reading the book, it feels organic, the way it sort of unfolds. And sometimes I think if you read a lot, you can kind of, when you read a novel, sometimes you you feel like the writer knows everything that's going to happen, and it feels very plotted and ordained in a way, which maybe takes a little life out of it sometimes. But with your work, it feels almost like we're exploring this together in a way, which is a rare thing, I think. Is this more aggravating, joyous, a combination of all things when you're sitting down to try to find that thread?
It is very joyful when I can feel that I'm onto something. But on the other hand, when I'm not, it's just horrible. But then again, you just need to write, And I think the wonderful feeling is that when you feel like I'm writing something now that is totally out of my. I have never worked in an open plan office. I've never even worked in an office. I know nothing about these things. I have been in the theater all my life. Yet I can feel that there is something there that I have experienced myself. Sort of, I've experienced similar situations, perhaps in the theater, in the movie business, or not even at work, in other occasions. And when I can feel that there is something here that is sort of communicating with something that I know about, that is a wonderful feeling, because then I can create it in this world, but based on my own experience. And I think that's the beauty of it.
So I'm curious then, no office experience. I've had very little office experience, but this does apply, I think, to anybody who has coworkers.
But I think, people say, but you've worked in the theater or in the movie business your whole life. How can you know so much about the intrigues in an office, But I would guess that, it's a lot more similar than you think. We have a lot of intrigues and it's the same thing.
I feel like it's probably almost amplified in the film business in a way. Because Bjorn is sort of, imagine the coworker you have the most complicated relationship with, and then multiply that by 10, and then imagine having to sit down with him for 200 pages, and then he tells you his story, and that's this book. But and I think I would like to ask a little bit about the comedy or tragedy aspect, because Bjorn, you talked about cutting a lot out and sort of following a thread and picking up one thread, and I do think the book is kind of minimal in a way that it has this universal quality, and that goes a little bit back to the way it's narrated by a single narrator who, in some ways, is very self-conscious, and all of his actions seem a little premeditated. But then there are these huge gaps, and that you as a reader realize something's going on there. And it takes a while to kind of figure that out. From the opening, you can get a sense of it with the humor there. Were you discovering him as you went along? Was he like revealing himself to you in the same way that he does to us?
Indeed, I was. Yeah. Yes, I actually had the idea. I told this yesterday, so you that were here yesterday. You get to hear it one more time. But I had the idea. Actually, when I was working at the theater, we were playing Eugene O'Neill's play, A Long Day's Journey into Night, and I was playing Edmund, the younger brother. And Edmund doesn't appear on stage in the second part of it. He doesn't appear on stage for like 30 or 40 minutes or something. So I had a lot of time sitting in the wings of the theater watching my fellow actors, and I used to lean my head against the wall. And one night, when I was sitting there, it just occurred to me that my side of the wall seemed much shorter than the other side. Because on the other side there was this corridor leading to the main stage and the sofa where actors used to sit and gossip about each other, and I couldn't stop thinking about this. It seemed much shorter. So I went back and forth a few times, compared, and it was much shorter. So then I realized that there had to be something else back there, and I started to fantasize about this secret room that the theater administration had there, and I fantasized about Ingmar Bergman, because he was at the theater at the same time, and I was sort of visualizing him sitting there in the secret room writing in his little black book about evil actors, and But then we after the show, I went around the corner, and then I discovered that there was this old smoking room there, which I had just totally forgotten about.
Mm-hmm.
So end of mystery. But by then I had the idea about the secret room. But what I didn't know at the time was that it was going to be even more secret.
Yeah, the end of one mystery and the beginning of another.
Exactly. And then I sort of, what I did was, so to begin with, when I started writing this story, I more or less imagined that it was me walking into the room. But then, as you go along writing, you need to create a character, and so I took a few of my own bad habits and just turned them up to 11. To use a Spinal Tap, but I just turned them up. So after a while, I realized I had created this monster that was sort of me, to begin with. But he was, as you said before, he is both very socially inept and awkward and not very likable at all. And then he got this thing with this, room that everyone else doesn't see.
Yeah.
So I think while writing it, I had times when I thought that this is too crazy. He's too crazy, and I almost felt sick, while writing it, because this is too weird. And what will my friends think about me? But the thing is that, and then I wrote a whole lot of pages, and then I did something in the theater, or I made a movie or something, I don't remember, and then I came back to it. And what happened then was that, I think, and this is like the quote, I can't remember who said it, but the quote is, what is comedy? Well, comedy is tragedy plus time. And I think that's because when I came back to it, everything seemed much more funny than when I left it.
So it's hard not to talk about, to kind of spoil in some ways the book. We talk about this room. So Bjorn discovers a room that, as narrated in the novel, is physically, it can exist as in this office. In some ways it can exist, but the thing is, you're in Bjorn's head, and a lot of things that he thinks exist maybe don't exist, or a lot of things he thinks doesn't exist do exist. He has a very complicated relationship with his coworkers. His social ineptness is almost, it is in many ways kind of tragic. Also very funny, and sometimes I find myself laughing in the book where I felt like maybe I shouldn't have been. He has sort of an encounter with this receptionist who he thinks like she's very nice, and he has this interaction with her, and she says, "Hello, my name is Margarita," and he just looks at her and he says, "I felt like I should say something, but good, nice name, Margarita." And this is all in his head. He doesn't even reply. You just imagine this blank stare where he is, and another one of those moments of sort of the reader has to figure out what's happening there.
I was actually trying to, because it's written in first person, so like you said, we see everything through Björn's eyes only, and at one point I actually tried to rewrite it in third person, because it was such a narrative challenge to describe everything that happened through Björn's eyes only, because as you said, he doesn't experience things the way that we do. Yeah. so it was a hard thing to tell, what was really going on. So I tried to do that, and I actually write a few chapters, but then I realized that it wasn't possible, because then it was like I was pointing at him, and I was, saying, look at this crazy guy, look at all those crazy things that he does, and that was not at all what I wanted, because in some way I want you to, you should be able to relate to Bjorn, and even if you don't identify with him, you should be able to empathize with him, and I think what I think is a good thing is that when the book has been out for a while and I travel around meeting people, people are really empathizing with him, although he is such a weirdo. Which I think is a good thing. I mean, it says something about us as a human creatures, that we're empathic creatures. We're able to empathize even with those who walks to the beat of a different drummer.
Yeah. And in some ways, almost proves not that literature needs to have sort of a salutary aim, but it proves, I think, in a way that it is educating in a way and does enlarge your consciousness and your scope of empathy. But I wonder, because a lot of times when you read reviews or you hear people talk about books, they say I didn't like the character, I couldn't relate. And I wondered, was that in your mind as you were writing this then, as you sort of turned it up to 11, that you're thinking okay, it almost feels like a challenge to me that you're you might not like this character, but I'm going to make you empathize with him.
Yeah, that's sort of the challenge. When you write a book like this and he's so awkward and strange. I mean, that's you have to face that. And I mean, a lot of people had told me that no, he's too unlikable. I can't read about this character. But I think as I told you, I think one of the sort of unsettling nature about this story is both that. Because it's written in third person and we have to experience the whole story through Björn's eyes. It's not only that you might be this guy who sees things that necessarily aren't there, but also that you might be that guy. Because that's what everyone says, that we all know one or two of these guys, that there are one or two in each office. And I think this book tells and it might be you.
Yeah. You look around statistically and you start to worry. And you're oh.
Exactly. Is it me?
Yeah.
Or
all right. And so, in some ways, I noticed throughout the book that Björn again is. He reminded me a bit of Dwight from the Office, especially the American version of that, where he's sort of this very intense guy whose idea of himself. At some point in the book, Björn compares himself to Copernicus, and then you realize, only once, and then his boss at some point comes over and says, "Have you compiled the cell phone list, the phone list?" And you're thinking, what is this guy's job? And it is. So his sort of ambitions and his sense of himself are outsized and by proportions that are astronomical, to keep with the Copernicus thing. And he also, you use in a lot of ways, and he thinks of himself in terms of cliches. He thinks of himself in these sort of prepackaged formulas. He's I'm aspiring to be the best person I can, and whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger, and you live and you learn. And in some ways, I think the fact that his consciousness is so powerful and can overwhelm a reader and is so strong is then maybe not subverted by his almost very unself-reflecting analysis of himself. But in some ways he's a type, in some ways he's completely sui generis, he's one of a kind. But I wonder, was that a part of your formulation of his character, is to think someone who maybe thinks in these terms?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that's also one part that I turned up to 11, because I think it's sort of, once you start to think about yourself in those terms, it happens something to you, and I think that's, I guess you could call it a sort of mild social critic, because I think we tend to do that, and if you go that way all the way, it's this is what happens.
Yeah. Everything about him becomes aspirational in a way, where everything is the next step toward climbing the corporate ladder in a way, and how that affects a life. Yeah. And you can see that in his daily life, and there's no divide between the two. Yeah. And in some ways, that the sort of another social critique is how we think of work and how work defines us.
Exactly, another sort of cultural exciting thing is that here, and in Sweden, it's set in this nameless authority, which we have a lot of in Sweden. but I noticed that American readers tend to more think of this as the corporate environment, and they sort of that's what it's remind them about, and I think it's it could be anywhere. And I think that is actually the most wonderful thing about being a writer, is that, and especially when you're getting translated and published in so many different countries, that you get to travel and hear so many different interpretations of your story. Because I had people, especially about this book, people are coming up to me and really explaining to me what this book is really about. and I think that's wonderful, because as I said before, I just write. I just keep on writing and try to follow the mystery and explore. And I have like no hidden agenda at all. So people ask me, this book is really about alcoholism, isn't it? Or this book is really about drugs or religion, because this is only a metaphor for these things. And I can only say, I don't know. You're probably right.
I mentioned earlier, we were talking, and I mentioned knowing that you're an actor. When I read the book, I thought, oh, this is about the acting process. And again, another, you can add me to the list of people telling, But I think the beauty of it is that there is a deceptive simplicity to it, that it does. You'll form your own opinion in a way. And that comes through. You can tell through the writing that you went into it almost like, let's see where this goes.
I think it might be that working as an actor is that I've always written a lot. I've written since I was little. Diaries and notes and even poetry, and the things you write when you go to high school, and I'm deeply grateful for all the publishing companies that rejected my work back then, because no, what I was going to say is that I think that working as an actor is a good thing, because you get to spend so much time. You get to spend so much time with text, analyzing it and even learning it off by heart. So I think one thing as an actor, you get quite good at telling what you need and what you don't need, what you can take out. So hopefully this is more, because I would like it to be that I describe certain details very, very intense, and then leave a lot of other stuff out of it, so that you as a reader are able to see your own pictures and
kind of fill in the
gaps,
mostly almost blank space on a page, right? And you are constantly doing that. And I think that's what part of the great joy of reading a novel like this is, that you are so actively involved and in creating and sustaining this world that is given to you, and that has so many layers. Do any of the sort of theories about the book strike you more than others, or are you just sort of like tickled by them all? And
I've learned so much about this book since it's been published. So I'm so happy for it, because I think it makes the whole experience so rich. People have said some really clever things about this story, and I mean the people talking about as I mentioned, drugs or the whole thing about having a room of your own and the space you need. I think it's applicable on a lot of things. I mean, don't we all need to have like a room? What is your room? Your own room, your own space. Where you can go, because the thing is, as I don't want to reveal too much, but the thing is that Bjorn, when he's inside the room, he's very effective. He's able to do a much better work than outside.
Yeah.
So there is something there.
And so it's hard to read this as an American reader and not to sort of harken back to Herman Melville's Bartleby, which is another one of these books that is endlessly interpreted. And Bartleby is almost the antithesis in some ways to Bjorn. Bartleby just prefers not to, and Bjorn would prefer nothing more than to accomplish a higher task or to move up in the company. And so that space, there are, again, to sort of go back to this idea of sort of the excision and things that are left out. For Bjorn, it seems it's a very precise space in some ways, as ambiguous as it can be. It harkens back to like some troubles that he must have had that, like we all have, and that can some ways kind of float under the surface, and we don't want to deal with. And without talking too much about the end, I did read in an interview that it was slightly changed. Is that from Swedish to English?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is it in some ways 2 books now, or is it just so slight that
it's just the ending? It's just like the last page or something.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was more because it was published in Sweden for like 3 or 4 years ago or something.
Okay.
So and with that time, because you tend to think about your stories all the time, so I just had the opportunity to change it. I changed it.
Yeah, that's great. That's not common. And that kind of goes to the translation, which maybe is something I would like to ask you about. You've worked with the same translator now for both books. How involved are you in that process, if at all?
Well, Neil Smith is the name of the translator, and he is. I think he's just truly great. We meet now and then, but we almost never discuss. Well, we sort of discuss the tone of the books, and with this one, the other one, the Invoice, I was particularly interested in sort of capturing the because this book is a book that is so much about emotions and feelings and soft stuff, but it's another authority in this one, and they sort of approach this subject with a very sort of economical language. And I wanted that clash to survive the translation. So we talked a little about that, how to do that. But otherwise, I think he's just great. Yeah. He's doing wonderful work.
So you trust him? I mean, you trust him implicitly?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just tell you about Melville's
please do.
The Screwdriver, which I think interesting is that it's not translated into Swedish.
Really?
Yeah, and I realized that this is one of the American canon. It's part of the American canon, I guess, or I've noticed this, and so many people have compared it to Bartleby, the Scrivener, but we don't have it in Sweden. So I didn't know about that book until.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Have you read it since, or?
Well, I bought it just the other day, so I will read it. But we have Moby Dick.
Yeah.
We do have, but not that one. Huh. And I think it's.
They would make a great pairing. I could see the two being in one volume and sort of pick these apart if you have ever worked with anyone ever. And so, and it's also, I think, the fact that you didn't know the existence of that sort of speaks to the universal aspect of it. And that there are two sides to the coin. And so maybe we can talk a little bit then about the corporate structure of the authority. I think, we are all sort of confronted by nameless, faceless organizations, even, we might work for them, where lots of convoluted hierarchies. Bjorn's immediate boss kind of comes across as this sweaty, kind of nervous guy who just wants there to be peace. But then the higher up you go, the more sort of mystifying and faceless the authority gets, which is this weirdly dehumanizing thing about working maybe in any industry, really, unless you're your own boss or something and you live the dream. And I wonder if that was based on an experience, maybe in your film life or just in, getting bills in the mail and not knowing who to talk to, that sort of, those levels of which remove, that leave us feeling so perplexed. And, Kafka, the book has been described as Kafkaesque as well, which I think captures that experience.
I think one of the things that I wanted in this story, speaking about things that you experienced yourself and try to put into this book, was that Bjorn is he is weird. He is a very awkward guy, but as the story moves along, you sort of realize that well this workplace, they're not very healthy either, This and the way they treat this, the problem that comes up. It's horrendous, isn't it? It's not really working. It's not so. And I think that's the beauty of the absurd element, because as soon as you bring in an absurd element, like in this case the room, you have to look at all the other stuff with different eyes as well, all the stuff that we have around us each day, and hopefully you can discover things that is sort of strange there too.
Yeah, we go from trusting him to questioning him to then thinking, as he proves himself very capable in a lot of ways. Like you said, there's this domino effect that happens. And I wonder then if, as someone who, as Bjorn is this, kind of thorn in his coworkers' sides, what, his successes, say in some ways about like how we do treat or bully people who are different from us, and the sort of larger, more more applicable to our even social lives and not just work lives. If that was something on your mind as this unfolded, or if that just came about as you got more and more into this character's head.
I tend to think both as an actor and as a writer, I think in some way we all have the experience of both being in the situation when you're sort of bullied, or sort of not in the group. And I guess we also have the experience of being in the group, inside the group, and it's well, yes, it's of course it's based on my experiences, but there's nothing that I can point that this happened there or then or perhaps a few things, but no, it's more like a feeling, and I'm happy to sort of write about it in this world.
Yeah. No, I wasn't trying to correlate one-to-one. No, I would never. But I wonder, so how your bio states that you came to writing partly because of your love of acting and playwriting and novels. What's the difference between writing a novel and writing a screenplay? Do you find much of one other than the form, or?
I have actually never written a screenplay.
Oh, okay.
I've only written plays.
Plays. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I sort of I found when I started writing, I just write the lines. I left out all the stage directions because I realized being an actor, you don't think about them anyway. You just do as you want to. But I think because I wrote plays them for a couple of years, and then I wanted to write more and more about these characters, and so I actually had this. I was working on. I had written a few plays, and they got. They played them in the theater, and it worked out quite well. So I thought, well, I write more. But then I was writing a new play, and then the characters sort of outgrew the story. So I opened this other document and started writing about these characters just for fun. And then I went back to the play. But then I realized more and more of my days when I was coming to my little writing place was more like I was starting on this play that I was writing, working 10 minutes or something, and then I just shifted to this other document and writing the stories. So after a while I realized that perhaps that's what I should do, write about these things instead. That became my first short story collection. And then, as I said, they just became longer and longer.
Yeah. And you talked a little earlier. So in Sweden, you're primarily known as an actor, and that you're recognizable and you have a face that people know. And then when you come to the U.S., you are a writer. And I wonder, sort of like, if you feel relief or just like wearing different hats, what that means to you as you sit at this table as an author of short story collection and 2 novels now, or at least 2 novels translated. Like, if there is a divide between the worlds, maybe the distinction is artificial between everything that you do. But if you feel a difference,
I think it's an enormous relief to be to come out and just be looked upon as a writer. because in Sweden I'm people recognize me, and in Sweden I'm more like the actor who think he can write, and but when I'm abroad and I get to go to other countries, I'm just treated as a writer, which is sort of like a second life. I get the second chance, and my books get the second chance, and I'm so happy for all the great reviews and this journey that they're on, because I think it's hard. Perhaps it's the same in the US, but at least in Sweden, it's hard to be one thing and then start doing something different. People tend to judge and look upon you with different eyes.
And I imagine every writer would much prefer to be looked upon as an actor. I think you might be one of the only people in the world who you're like, I get to be treated like a writer. And writers are like, if only I could be treated like an actor. I can. And so maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about the new book? The Invoices, in some ways, it's great. It's out next month. I was fortunate enough to get an early copy. In some ways, sort of is almost, maybe not the antithesis, but a good pairing in a lot of ways. You go from Bjorn, who is this complicated and often unlikable character, to the new character who is like an everyman in a sense. And was this a conscious decision to sort of switch gears and to think about a different kind of consciousness or a different kind of character?
No, it wasn't. I was just, as I told you, I was just writing another story, or a few of them, and then I came upon this story. One day I came to my little writing place, and I was just feeling very good about myself. And about the world and everything. I was feeling very at ease with myself, everything was just wonderful for no particular reason. Because, sometimes you can feel happy because you're in love or because you're in Berkeley or, whatever. But this was just out of the blue. I was just feeling great. But my first reaction wasn't, oh, what a wonderful day. What should I do with this great mood that I'm in? It was, or the contrary, it was more like, uh-oh, am I really allowed to feel like this? For free? So I started to write about this guy, this ordinary guy, just working part-time in a video store, and he doesn't have anything, actually, not even a girlfriend, but sort of enjoying his life. Suddenly one day he receives this invoice, which is in a credible amount of money. He's invoiced. It's on 5,700,000 kroner. And obviously he thinks this must be some kind of mistake. They have mistaken me for like a big company or conglomerate or something, oligarch or something. so he just doesn't give a damn. But then he gets a reminder a month later, and then he realizes, what is this? So he actually calls the authorities called WRD, which is a short for World Resources Distribution, and he is put in line or telephone queue for like 12 hours or something. But then eventually he gets through, and he gets to speak to this woman, Maud, who tells him that no, there's no mistake here. You're invoiced. This is your amount. This is your EH amount, which is experienced happiness points. Yeah.
What I really loved about the book, and both books, is that you have these that's a big concept, and it can get away from a lot of writers, I think, but it's so grounded in particulars. In the invoice, it's grounded in these phone calls, or this one maybe long phone call in some ways, where things develop and characters are revealed and twists and turns take place. So if you sit down with an idea or a thought or like something you've overheard, and then what's the transition like from concept to particular, or does it work in the other way? Does it work, from the particular to the concept?
Yeah, I think so, because I try to not think of a concept too soon. Mm-hmm. I try to just, as I told you, I try to just dwell on the moment or the situations and see what is this. For instance, for a very long time I had this I was pretty sure that this whole invoice thing was a big scam, and I was just waiting for when is it going to be revealed that this is just some kind of shady company, trying to defraud people. But I never got there, and so obviously it was real. Do you want me to read from it?
Yeah, I would love to hear it. I'm sure everyone else
would. Do you want to hear some?
Yeah.
This is actually the first time that our main character, gets through to this woman on the phone, and she says, "Have you got beta or link?" The woman said on the phone. "What did you say?" I said. "Which payment system have you signed up with?" "No idea," I said. I don't think I got one at all." "No?" she said. "No." "But you do have a plan." "A plan? You got a payment plan linked to your EH account." I waited a moment. "I don't think so," I said. "You haven't registered?" she said. "No," I said. "Should I have?" She didn't say anything for a while, so I repeated the question. Is that something I should have done?" She cleared her throat. "Well, let me put it like this. Yes." I felt a sudden urge to sit down. "But what am I supposed to be paying for?" I said. "What?" she said. "Yes, everything," she said. "What do you mean, everything?" I asked. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the kitchen wall and my legs pulled up to my chest. The knees of my jeans were starting to look a bit threadbare. It wouldn't be long before I had a hole there, whether I liked it or not. And even though I realized it probably wasn't fashionable anymore, I still thought it would look a bit cool. She hesitated a moment before answering, but even though she was silent, I could hear the wariness in her breathing. "Where are you calling from?" she said. "Well, I'm at home," I said. "At home, okay. Look around you. What can you see?" I raised my eyes from the floor and looked around the room. I see my kitchen," I said. "So, what can you see there?" A sink, some dirty dishes, the table." "Look out of the window." "Okay." I stood up and went over to the kitchen window. "What can you see outside?" the woman asked down the phone. Buildings, I said. A few trees. What else? More buildings and the street, a few cars. What else? I can see a blue sky, the sun, a few clouds, people, children playing on the pavement, adults, shops, cafes, people out together. Exactly. Can you smell anything? Yes. You can feel something, can't you? The woman continued. You're feeling feelings, thinking of different things, friends and acquaintances. And I presume you have dreams. She was no longer bothering to wait for me to reply. What do you mean, I said. Do you dream at night? She went on. Sometimes. Do you imagine all that is free? I didn't say anything for a while. Well, I suppose I thought, is that really what you thought? She said. I tried to come up with a reply, but my thoughts were going round in circles without formulating themselves into any sort of order. The woman on the phone went on giving a long explanation of the divisions of costs, resolutions, single payments and deduction systems. It sounded almost as if she knew it off by heart. But how can it amount to so much? I said, when I could speak again. Well, she said, being alive costs. I said nothing for a while, because I didn't know what to say. But I eventually said, I had no idea it was so expensive.
While reading that, I felt, oh, this is so prophetic. This is terrifying in some ways. That this is the kind of world that we live in, where it feels like that is almost an inevitable possibility in the next 15 years. Maybe with that, we could open it up to some audience Q&A, if you were willing to answer some questions here. Yeah, maybe start up front.
Ja, tack för att du kom hit och prata med oss. Yeah, I would like to ask if the name, as for on the original room, Bjorn, being asocial, choosing the name of a bear, you know, that the whole imagery, the wild savageliness and the not social with the human world, if that was intentional in your mind and you were keeping that as part of ways you were developing it, or whether this was just simply that was a name, since nam, that you could use.
Sir, that is a brilliant thought.
Wish I had it.
Yeah, exactly. I wish I would have thought about that, but I can't say I did. but thank you, because I think that is pretty much it, isn't it? I mean, he is like a bear. Sorry, but unfortunately I can't tell. I can't say I thought about it, but
going forward, yeah, you.
But thank you so much.
Questions?
Hi, I just wanted to say that both the books you were talking about just have such unique ideas and they're so creative. And I try to write short stories, but I'm always thinking of like unique creative ideas because those are the kind of stories I like reading. Like I'm sick of reading all this stuff again and again. So I thought it was really interesting when you talked about how you came up with the idea of the room and how you were waiting to go on stage and you thought of what's behind in the room. And I thought about how not everyone I know would even be thinking along those lines, and like I can kind of see the creativity in you. So do you think that creativity is just an intrinsic quality, or do you think it came to you because you've been in the creative industry as an actor and a screenplay writer? So just hoping you could talk about that.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I think that for me it's like this. I think you get ideas all the time, don't you? I mean, things happen, and I think it's more like but that's not the hard thing. The hard thing is to write them, and try to get them on paper and explore them, and I think it's because I get this, a little that people tell me you have great ideas, and well, I do think there are some good ideas here, but I think. The world is full of ideas, and and as I said, different situation, and I sort of, I start writing so many different situations, and so many. In my computer, I have so many beginnings of the stories. I have like a page or two, or just a line, and even more. Some of them are like 30, 50 pages, but I can't really get to what you would call the thing, because as I told you, this when I got the idea, that was just the beginning to this, but there is actually not much more to it. Then you need to sort of create the world. So I would say, like everyone else, I just keep on writing, because eventually you will find that there is something in the story that sort of speaks to you, or wakes something in yourself, and I think that's the important moment.
Do you think a little bit of it? You talked earlier about sort of perseverance. I mean, you're saying we have these ideas, but then you have to sit down and follow them and let them lead you into a lot of dead ends and detours. And you think a lot of it has to do with just following along.
Exactly, because I had great ideas, really, great ideas that I have. I was forced to get hold of a paper and write them down when I was in a hotel or in some other situation, and I got to remember this, and I write it down, and then I take them to my writing place, and then I just start writing about them, and then I realize, but this, it leads to nothing. So I think it might be that, a good idea is a good idea, but it might be that the thought about this good idea is perhaps a little bit overrated.
More questions?
Hi there, really enjoying this session. I was just interested because I read a lot of Scandinavian literature, all kinds of things from Peter Hög to Henkel Manning.
Yeah.
Love Scandinavian crime, but I just wondered if you were under any pressure, because you've got such a quirky, you're doing your own thing, but I just wondered if you were under pressure by publishers to go in a certain direction, say, you could definitely do some crime here because you've got this sort of black. So just interested in that.
Well, I can only say that my publisher house, they would love it if I wrote a crime story, but I think I can tell you that I never will, because it's sort of not my. Well, you don't know. I mean, it's. If you begin on something and it turns out to be a crime novel, it could be that. But I'm not really. I'm not so much into death, and violence. So it's not really my thing. Yeah. More gentleman's crime mystery, that would be, I guess.
I was just interested in any influences that you might have, like, of course, the flyer here uses the word Kafka, I believe. So, and there are sort of distant echoes in the authority room, and even in the strange bill and paying for breathing, so to speak. What about that? I focus on Kafka because they said Kafka, but others as well, potentially Scandinavian versus English versus whoever. All right.
Well, let me just begin by saying that I'm deeply grateful for even being mentioned in the same breath as Kafka, which is of course a hero of mine, and I guess I'm inspired by Kafka, of course, but I'm also inspired by if we should go down that way, I would say Dostoevsky, and especially his shorter works. even though the longers are wonderful also and great. But those are strong. I'm very inspired by them, but also a lot of American writers. I have such a bad memory for names. Forgive me. When it comes to playwriters, I love Harold Pinter, for example, the British Harold Pinter, but also what's his name? Smoke. Auster, Paul Auster, exactly. Well, what else can I? I think I love a Swedish Finnish writer who's called Tove Jansson, which she writes beautiful children's books about the Moomin trolls. You might have heard of them, but she also writes adult fiction, short stories, wonderful short story collections.
Becoming increasingly, the last couple of years, they've been published here in translations, and they've been becoming increasingly popular. Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
She was a great writer, and especially these short stories, which are also sort of, from time to time they tend to be sort of absurd as well. So I think.
Do you to sort of go off on a tangent? Do you feel like you belong in a tradition? Do you think about that at all, or is it just you write books and there they are?
I just write books.
Yeah, that's a question for me to think about. For did you, and you sort of mentioned absurdity a few times. Did, the theater of the absurd, obviously being a huge 20th century movement, does that affect? Has your acting career affected the way you think about, but not even just the act of writing, but the thoughts that go into even before you write? Is there more of a the craft of acting influence on you besides just the playwrights whose plays you've acted in?
I think I think I consider myself to be what would you call that? An actor by heart. I will always be an actor, and perhaps it's one of the things you need to do as an actor is observe other people and try to remember dialogues and how people interact with each other. So I think if that was the question, I guess I'm like an actor personality. Yes, and I also think that I perhaps learned, because I think I've learned a lot about writing from being an actor. In sense of what you need and what you don't need, and working with the text and so on, as I told you before. But I also think that I might have learned something about being an actor through writing, because, for example, from time to time I think I have discovered that since I started writing, I discovered that you sometimes, as an actor, you could stand in front of the text, and sort of hide something. Sometimes it's, less is more, even for an actor. So I think it goes both ways, yes.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, there are a couple scenes in the book where Björn is called into the office, and everybody's in there in the office. And I've spent a lot of time in Sweden, and I always think of Swedes as being sort of conflict averse, and that's a very difficult thing to sort of have to confront somebody about their behavior. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those scenes in particular say about kind of the Swedish way of coping with that sort of personality conflict in a work setting.
Well, I guess Swedes are. I think the more general thing is that we are sort of. What is the word? We like to agree, and we want it to be like that, consensus orientated. You know, we don't have great arguments. That's not in our culture. Although we might have different views of things, but we don't really, you know, we tend to keep that inside of ourselves until we explode. But and I've noticed that because I've noticed especially when I've traveled around in the rest of Europe, because there's a big difference between Sweden and, for instance, Italy or France, where people tend to be more in a sort of Catholic way, you know, arguing and having different ideas and points of view, and that's a part of the you know, the discussion it's quite high, you know, and intense, and I think a lot of Swedes are quite scared of that, you know. We don't really know how to approach, you know, is he angry with me now, or is he just, you know, having a good discussion? I think so I think that is and when we do keep things inside, they sort of, you know, tend to leak out in other places, so we have this kind of strange situations when we talk about one thing and mean a totally different thing. But I think that's good for, you know, it's good for an actor to be in those places when people say one thing and mean another.
Any more questions? We're just about out of time. I'd like to thank you all for coming out and thank you for giving us a great conversation reading.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
The book signing, where will he be signing books?
Yeah, book signing will be right outside to the left. Please get a book signed, and thank you all again. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.